There we go. Welcome. It's 12 o'clock. We'll get started here on Friday as we wrap up week 5. I want to thank everyone for joining us at the Montana Chamber of Commerce for our weekly Capital Connection. We're just going to cover some of the highlights for this week and then look at next week and then check in on kind of how some of the chamber priorities are doing. The first part of this conversation that I have here with Bridger, we record this. And then as soon as we finish kind of the introduction of this week, next week, and the chamber priorities, we'll stop the recording and then we'll open it up to questions for anybody that may have questions about bills that are upcoming or may have happened this week for updates. And so with that, Bridger, we're wrapping up week 5. Here we are into February, and it seems like a lifetime has passed, but at the same time, it feels like it's going really quickly. What's happened this last week?
Yeah, Todd, things are starting to pick up, and that's in part because the transmittal deadline, and again, transmittal means certain bills have to either get to the opposite body or they will fail by default in the body that they originated in. And the transmittal date for general bills that don't have to do with revenue or have an appropriation attached to it, that transmittal deadline is coming up in just a few weeks. And so we're starting to see a little more pressure on legislators to get their bills introduced, those bills of consequence, because we're going to start hitting that bottleneck relatively quickly.
What happened this week of consequence that would be good to know about?
Yeah, a couple bills I'll highlight that the chamber was involved in this week. One of them was House Bill 14, and this is the long-range building bonding program. This is a typical piece of legislation that runs through the process every session, and for the most part, it's basically one of several bills that have to do with long-term infrastructure projects and being able to bond at what we believe are reasonable interest rates to achieve those projects and get the funding out necessary to get them done. And House Bill 14 often contains critical need water and wastewater projects throughout the state. And infrastructure investment, of course, is a hallmark of what the Montana Chamber does. We want to have functional commerce throughout our state, and having those critical assets is super important to achieve that. And so we supported that in a joint appropriation subcommittee. And that's a whole process in itself. The appropriations process, you have several subcommittees that are reviewing types of bills, and then it goes to the full appropriations committee, et cetera. And this was that first step for that bill, and we weighed in with general support as it moves on to the whole appropriations committee. So that's on its way. We support it, and we appreciate Representative Mike Hopkins of Missoula for taking the lead on that one. A bill we opposed this week that should be of note for folks who might be watching this was a proposal to offer up a constitutional amendment to limit the types of taxes that Montana can employ. And basically it just said you could have 2 of the following 3 taxes: an income tax, a property tax, and a general statewide sales tax. It looks good on its face if you're just if you're just a general taxpayer, you're looking at this like, great, there might be some more predictability here, but we believe from a business perspective that hamstring our government as far as how to do reasonably low appropriate taxation in a broad base, we're hamstrung a little bit by passing a bill like this, because it limits the options for folks like us to continue to advocate for meaningful structural tax reform that would deliver meaningful business tax relief. So a well-intended idea, but one of those ones that we just don't think is best policy for the state when it comes to tax climate. So those are a couple highlights from the week, Todd.
So the constitutional amendment bill there, that would have essentially permanently set aside one avenue for taxation. So if we wanted to reform taxes and introduce a different sort of a tax, that would essentially prohibit that and just force us to being able to continue to live on 2 legs of a taxing stool.
Exactly. And one other consequence of note is that the legislation is silent on other types of fees and other taxes that we know of. And one example that when I read the bill I was concerned about was when you just limit to those 3 tax types, what happens to Montana's portion of the fuel tax? Does it go away as this bill might stipulate? And if so, we lose out on almost a 1-to-10 match of federal funding for our roads and bridges across the state. How would we support those infrastructure assets if this bill had passed? So again, unintended consequences seem to permeate this bill.
What about chamber priorities, Bridger? How are we doing on some of our keystone pieces of legislation?
Yeah, well, I want to get up and dance almost, and with the new logo in the back. Really exciting news. Senate Bill 65. You've heard about it every week since we've been doing this. COVID liability protections for businesses. It passed both the House and was concurred in with the Senate, given some amendments were put on in the House. Bottom line, the bill passed its final hurdle in the legislature yesterday, and today it is being sent to the governor's office for an anticipated signature next week. And this is a cornerstone piece of legislation for the Montana Chamber this session, and to get it through the process this quickly, we can't be just crediting ourselves for that victory. The governor's office came up big, making it a priority of his own, working with us on the bill all the way through and emphasizing its importance to reopen Montana's economy. In addition, of course, to key legislators who made this thing happen for us. Senator Steve Fitzpatrick of Great Falls. We worked hand in hand with him from the early days of drafting all the way through necessary amendments to get this thing through. And just the wisdom he brought to it was incredible. And of course, on the House side, Representative Mark Noland of Big Fork carried the day in the House with this bill and moved some legislators on it in a way that made this possible. So those are some key players that we also owe thanks to for a big victory coming up.
And this is legislation that we've been working on with Senator Fitzpatrick for months now, right? I mean, this is not something that occurred between the election and the opening day of the legislature. This has been a long-going, sort of painful process.
Yeah, Todd, Senator Fitzpatrick and I started talking about this bill in July. Let's just say that.
Yeah. So, well, that's great news. We had another bill that moved through, at least started in the House this week. That's a big priority to the Montana Chamber.
Absolutely. So this might be the first time we've talked about this at length in one of these videos, but another priority for the Montana Chamber this session is to amend the Wrongful Discharge Act. Again, in absence of employment at will in Montana, we have some very unique employment law statutes when it comes to the employment relationship and what you can and can't do when it comes to working with employees that might not be hitting the standard that you need them to. And so we've long been looking at how to make the Wrongful Discharge Act better for both employers and employees. And we found some fairly glaring ambiguities in how that statute was written in 1987. And we're bringing that up to date, in addition to revising the employee probationary period to give employers some more flexibility in evaluating fit and performance of your employees. And we're also looking out for keeping balance in the bill. We are also ensuring with that probationary period within this piece of legislation that employees can know that there's going to be a total cap on how long their probationary period can be. We set that at 18 months, whether it's a standard period or that with an extension. And this is important to employees, because right now the code is silent on how long a probationary period can be. So we're delivering predictability for both sides of the equation when it comes to the employment relationship. And this is really just a hallmark employment law bill that we've been waiting to do for a long time. And now that the stars have aligned to be able to do that, it's really great news. And we certainly owe credit through this point, and as it continues to go through, experts in the field of employment law helped us draft this bill. And today it got through executive action of the House Business and Labor Committee after a very productive hearing this week. So that's on its way to the floor, and we're really excited about its prospects, Todd.
And this is really an important bill for small businesses, right? For those businesses in particular that don't have an HR department or don't have an attorney on staff to help them navigate through the process of moving an employee into a different sort of an opportunity from their business, right? And so this is really a significant change, particularly for small business.
Oh, couldn't agree more.
So let's look ahead. Big week next week. Again, the governor's going to start to unroll some of his signature tax initiatives. We touched on 2 of them last week. You've got a couple you're going to touch on today.
Yeah, Todd, I laugh because every week is going to be bigger than the last from here on out. But yes, we are really looking forward to partnering with Governor Gianforte on many of the proposals that comprise of his Montana Comeback Plan. And we previewed a couple of them last week in our video. We talked about the individual income tax proposal, and I believe the tax credit for employers who send their employees to additional trades education.
Right.
Those bills are going to be coming up for hearing next week, but I want to spend some more time on a couple others that we haven't touched on just yet. And one of those is truly a bread and butter issue of the Montana Chamber, business equipment tax. How much has that been a frustration for you as a business owner since you've started your operations here? Small manufacturer getting started, you're now getting slapped with this business equipment tax on top of all the other taxes that you already pay to do business in Montana. We have advocated for its reduction and or elimination for as long as the taxes existed. And so we're excited to see that Governor Gianforte is putting out a fiscally responsible reduction in the tax, just given where the budget stands today. So right now, if you don't know much about the business equipment tax, I'll just say off the top that it's basically for the first $6 million of taxable market value of equipment that you have, it is taxed at 1.5%. And then for anything above $6 million, it's taxed at 3%. In existing code, and actually the Montana Chamber was responsible for getting this exemption that I'm about to talk about in place in the first place. And currently, your first $100,000 of business equipment is exempt from that tax. We really wanted to send a strong message to folks that you need to invest your operations here, and the last thing you need is an additional cost of doing business. Governor Gianforte's proposal simply changes that first $100,000 of tax-free exemption and doubles it to the first $200,000. And it's anticipated that doing so will take, I believe the mark is around 3,500 some Montana businesses completely off the tax rolls when it comes to that specific punitive tax. So we're really excited to support that bill. It's House Bill 303, and it's going to be heard this coming Tuesday. Then the second one I'll touch on, Todd, is still in LC form, but we anticipate that it's going to come out and have a hearing as early as next week. LC 541 is the Governor's Entrepreneur Magnet Act. And what this bill does is it's meant to attract entrepreneurs, much like I think the very clever name that they came up with for it. And basically what this is going to do is exempt from capital gains tax any employee-owned stock or IPO. And this is a great incentive for businesses to be working with employees to get them involved in the ownership of a business, partially through stocks or what have you. And so if an employee holds on to that stock or other ownership stake for more than 5 years, they are totally exempt from capital gains tax when they decide to realize those gains later. So we're also really excited about that bill.
That's going to be a big potential for new business growth, particularly as we see a lot of the activity going on in the high-tech sector in some of the western Montana towns, where this could be something that you start out with a small company, you grow it up large, right? And suddenly you get to a point where you can cash it out. This is an incentive for you to start that idea in Montana and grow it as big as you possibly can.
Right. I can't emphasize enough. It's truly about incentivizing the investment, because you don't qualify for the exemption unless you hold it for 5 years or more. It's a long-term investment in our state. And so that's just another reason why this bill should be supported and passed, quite frankly.
So if either of these two bills are attractive to you, we would encourage you to get with us and to provide us with a letter or something that we can provide onto the governor's office. They've specifically asked us if there are members of the Montana Chamber that are supportive of the business equipment tax, lifting that sort of exemption, and for this Entrepreneur Magnet Act that Bridger referenced. So if these are issues that are important to you and your business, feel free to get a hold of us as we're trying to collect some of that support, because I think it's also important that we identify businesses that are supportive of this as well. So with that, we've had a busy week. We've had a busy 5 weeks, starting week 6 next week. And again, any of this sort of information, as far as chamber priorities can be found on our prosperity plan that is on our website under the news tab. And you can go ahead and look at that and see how the chamber is lined up with some of our priorities going into the future here. We'll stop the recording at this point, and then we'll open it up for questions that anybody has about any of the legislation we've talked about, or anything else that you may be on your mind for the coming weeks.